uncharted waters, very interesting theme, right? When I first thought about this, I was introduced to the subject, and what came to mind, probably the same thing as you thought of: bravery, romance, poetry, heroes, stuff like that, right? And then I was thinking about this, and so I'm an economist. So what are economists allergic to? Bravery, poetry, romance, stuff like that, okay? So maybe I'm going to try to question a bit all of this. Not the concept, but the question is this: what's associated with uncharted waters, and how we're going to get, why do waters become uncharted, and how do they become less charted? That's probably the theme of this talk here. So let's start the three things I thought about, three experiences or three subjects I thought about when it comes to uncharted waters. The first one was obviously Christopher Columbus, probably the best case. Of course, I didn't know Christopher. I wasn't there. He succeeded, right? But, did people fail before he succeeded? I don't know. History books tend to be selective, to have selective memories. We all have selective memories. Also, the more history books you learn or you kind of read, the more confused you get. I had an experience last night because everything turned upside down about a certain thing. So again, was this really uncharted? Did people fail before him? Did he take experiences and insights from these failures? I'm kind of leaning towards answering the yes on that question. The second thing I thought about was startups. Again, a bit of romantic, technology, revolutions. We're going to change the world, connect people, dig holes in the ground, go to the moon, SpaceX, Elon, and so on and so forth. And then, again, I started thinking, okay, how many fail before one succeeds? So 9 fail, right? 9 startups fail, 1 succeeds. Which means, did these guys learn from the failures and successes? They probably did. We have a huge startup infrastructure today. We have the AUA Epic, we have the accelerators, incubators, we have angel aunts, angel uncles, tons of stuff behind it. Vested interest for 3 years, vested it for 5 years, convertible notes, whatever you wish. Everything is there to support you. So again, how uncharted is this? Make use of it as much as possible. Get advisors, get board members, get mentors, and so on. And all of the stuff, what does that do? That increases your chance of success. Again, your uncharted waters become less difficult, let's put it that way. And the third thing is probably my best try on this, my best try here. The third thing I thought about was love, okay? Is love the ultimate and only uncharted water experience? Why am I saying this? So imagine this, and I'm imagining this myself. So it's dark, it's a club, some consumption of alcohol, there's a girl, she's saying stuff to you, you're not hearing half of what she's saying. Do you care? You don't care. And then there's the drive home, dangerous car drive home, obviously. And then the next morning, what happens next morning? You have confirmation bias. Confirmation bias, I learned unfortunately what that means 15 years too late. Not because of the love stuff. Well, behavioral psychology is a very important thing to know in life. So what's confirmation bias? When you interpret the information you get, how you want to interpret it. So if you incline positively, every information you get, you kind of interpret it in a positive light. If you're negatively inclined, confirmation bias means you ignore the good things and just accept the best things, right? So this is what confirmation bias, it happens next day, and this is when you start interpreting everything positively or negatively, depending how you want it. So positively in my case. So if your best friend invites her to his party and she comes, well, basically she's into you, right? If she gives you a headache pill, your head is hurting on that party, well, that's destiny. So you're meant to be. So, and imagine this, you're going to be spending 60 years with that person. Obviously not after one night, but after a certain period of time that's quite short. Yeah. So 60 years of life with that specific person. Are you going to take any advice before you make that decision? Well, I didn't, right? Well, I didn't. Are you going to Google happy marriages? You're not. I didn't. Are you going to read books on the subject? You're not going to be reading books on the subject. Are your parents going to volunteer you advice? Specific negative advice? They will be risking eternal radio silence if they ever say anything negative to you about your newfound and eternal love. So this is probably, and another example from my own life, I had a friend, I had a girlfriend, I had an ex for 9 years, and he kind of told me, was brave enough to tell me that he didn't like my ex 4 years after we had broken up. And even then, I was upset at him and couldn't understand why the hell he would ever say something like that. Okay? So This is the closest I got. When I sent these lines to the organizers, I thought they would never reply to me back, because this, what the hell is this? And I see my wife leaving the audience. Okay, let's. Now I'm happily married, obviously. Okay. Okay, let's move on. Let's get a bit more serious. I'm going to tell you two things about my life experience. This was not about my life. I'm going to tell you about two things about my life experience that is kind of closely related to uncharted waters. The first one, and I'm going to be a bit more serious now, which means what is uncharted waters is when you have, I don't know, maybe 20 different outcomes, and every outcome's probability is, let's say, 5%. So basically, you don't know what's going to happen, what's going to hit you. That's one. And the second thing, statistically, well, I try to define it to myself, and you don't know the drivers behind these 5%. So you don't know how the 5 becomes a 10. Okay? You don't know the drivers behind it. So which means it's all unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. So there were maybe two experiences in my life that kind of resemble what I just mentioned. The first one was when I left from Armenia, early 1990s. You know, horror stories. Luckily, you were not there. So I left Armenia as a kid. Wars, blockades, and so on. I left the country. We got to Sweden with my parents, crossing the Baltic Sea. Immigrants, new language, new culture, new customs. New language is fine. You'll learn a new language. But the thing that's more difficult is new value systems, new mentalities, new ideologies. Everything is new. So Soviet from one side, and then something totally different. And imagine a kid, 11, I think I was, huge shock. You don't know what's going to happen, and you basically spare the practical stuff, right? You're not putting food on the table when you're 11. At least I wasn't back then, at least. So this is totally new, total shock. Immigrant suburbs, immigrant communities. Obviously, Sweden is a great country, but there are bad neighborhoods there as well. So I basically grew up in such a neighborhood, a very rough neighborhood. I went to one of the worst high schools in the country, even considered today. Very rough. Gang violence, criminality, robberies, narcotic smuggling, and so on. None of my friends studied. Most of them skipped school. Only one of my 10 friends actually went to university a couple of years after me. The other ones didn't. Some of my course mates ended up in jail, narcotic smuggling. So it was rough. And fortunately for me, I kind of went from one point, which is kind of one of the extremes, to not the other extreme, but kind of close to it. So I moved from that point to Stockholm City. Elite neighborhood, very good job, international consulting, traveling a lot, and then Harvard MBA and so on and so forth. So how did I manage to do this? And maybe it's so kind of moving from a very unpredictable environment. Everything is new. How did I move there? It's just a discipline towards education and academia. Okay, maybe as simple as that. But if you're young enough and you understand that this is one of the most important things in life, it kind of sounds boring, but that is. Okay. Academia is one of the most meritocratic places you will probably ever experience. At least in my life, that's the most meritocratic. Nobody's going to take away your knowledge. Nobody's going to take away your insights, your grades. Everything else in life is relationship, connections, all that stuff in Armenia and elsewhere. Obviously, in some countries more, in some countries less. But that stuff is far more prevalent than meritocracy, unfortunately. I worked in a company. You don't imagine how much corporate politics there is. Who's going to get promoted, who's not, who's going to take over, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. So I had the discipline and fortunate enough, so probably my parents drilled into me that this is the only path forward. When people ask how do you succeed in life, if you start up poorly, well, you study, okay? That's the one truth that's there. The second thing I would say is that a second message here on this experience is, imagine, again, I'm going to repeat it a bit, but when stuff is new to you, what do you do when somebody comes to you and says something you don't like? When something's totally different with what's inside your head, you push it back, right? You say, well, I'm right, you're wrong, your opinions, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, your argumentation is different, your values, what the hell are you saying, right? And you push it back. And that's probably one of the most difficult. It took me maybe 10, 15 years to understand why people acted, behaved, and had certain ideologies that they had. And trust me, when I kind of understood that, it made perfect sense from a point of view of productivity, efficiency, and social outcomes. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is that when somebody comes to you with a certain point and you kind of don't like it, your friends will tell you, you're such a great person, But when people say something you don't like, obviously you're not friends with them anymore. Okay? So this is the second experience. Try to put value on stuff when you don't understand, when you don't like. That's the second experience, and I kind of understood this a bit later because, you know, when you're young, you make too many categorical decisions. Well, this is right, this is wrong. What the hell are you talking about? That's experience number one. The second thing I'll mention is on this uncharted waters and how I encountered things in my life was when I actually, ironically enough, when I moved back. Okay, again, I did a good job. All of the people, kind of my closest people, stayed back. I kind of moved back. I got married. I started a startup, and I moved back. I did a fairly good job on the I'm forcing myself to settle on a marriage and moving back to Armenia. So I made a good job on that, and then I did a less good job at the startup thing. Okay, why did I make several? I made several things that I should have made better. First thing is when you're young, you take too many risks. That's one. By definition, it's like that. The more kids I have, the less risk-averse, the more risk-averse you become. That's one. Second thing is you're more categorical when you're young. It's either 0 or 1. There's nothing in between. There are a million of different solutions to a certain problem. So that's number two. You're also overconfident when you're young. You tend to make very fast decisions and not thinking about them before you make those decisions. And when you talk about startups, and I think it was mentioned, I'm part of the ICA, Angel Investor Club of Armenia. You probably heard this a million times before. Good teams are more important than good ideas. What's a good team? Teams that learn, teams that are coachable, teams that internalize advice and can change their orientation during the path, during the way. So that's the second thing. My experience, and that's what my polite advice or my polite suggestions, as I would say. Yeah, that's that. I asked to finalize this startup thing. I asked once, what's the background of this VC person? Somebody's tried to explain to me, well, he failed this company, he failed that company, he failed this company as well, and then he failed the other one too. So in tech, the more you fail, it's an experience. In life, obviously, I'm not wishing anyone to fail. So in order for you to succeed, to move from point A to and make a successful startup, maybe one should have a bit more corporate experience. Maybe one should, because what's a corporate experience? Corporate experience, you go there, they're telling you, do not make this mistake, do not make that mistake. When you're doing a startup, it's a trial and error. You make the mistakes. If you're good enough, you'll change the path. If you make a mistake, you'll change the path again. Okay? In a corporate environment, they not allow you to make mistakes, which means this path is a bit faster than this one. So, just an idea. Anyhow, I'm going to finalize this talk. I'm going to talk a bit about uncharted waters. A lot of time I hear Armenia, uncharted waters, the changes in 2018, oh, what's going to happen to us? The world's going to, I don't know, not end, but, you know, it's going to be a difficult place. Anyhow, my view on the subject is, maybe you can kind of sense what I'm going to lean to. I studied a lot of countries, and what I'm going to say is Armenia is a very new state, 25 years old. The good thing about that, there are plenty of bad things about it. The good thing about that is there are plenty of experiences of countries trying to move from failure or not, from poor status to a rich status, to an advanced country status, which means plenty of countries have tried to do this before. Most of them failed. Some succeeded. I would say majority failed. The total continents have kind of stayed stuck. So some of them moved, some of them didn't. Which moved? I would say which moved and succeeded. The ones that internalized best practice policies, best practice technologies, best practice innovation, all of that, public administration, all of that stuff. Which means as a country we have plenty of stuff to learn, to think, to internalize, and I'm talking about best practices, not average practices, best practices. And you have to also do this in a national interest, sovereign national interest. If you have national interest in mind, not party interest, not stakeholder interest, not some group interest, not a national interest, that's the highest thing. And you try to learn from others, that's when you get to good outcomes. Now I'm going to say a couple of things now which might become a bit of a shock. So I lived in several places, I analyzed many countries, and from my experience I'll say, we Armenians are a proud nation, right? We're proud, we have our own alphabet, we have our own culture, you know, language and so on and so forth. We all know that. What that unfortunately does, I think, that's my theory or hypothesis, I would say. During the last 25 years, we have been too much pushing to innovate, to do something our own, to come up with the bicycle again, and to innovate. To be frank, I've never seen any developing country coming up with a new technology, coming up with a new way of running a country, running efficient public administration. All of that has been done before, and they do it in a certain way because they probably tried some other ways and it failed, so they're doing the correct stuff. So you can have tons of different experiences and best practices to internalize, and what I say, we haven't done it as well. We didn't do this as well during the last 25 years. I sense today, with today's changes in today's government, is that after the Velvet Revolution, both the national interest part has gone up, I would say up substantially, and the second thing, I'm seeing far more examples of us trying to adopt best practices from the best places. So that's kind of gives me a lot of hope. Obviously, I'd like to see many more things, specifically on education part, which I'm still not seeing, but I'm seeing other things which kind of inspire me to think about this. In any event, try to conclude all of this. Yes, there probably are uncharted waters. Uncharted waters is we kind of, if you're trying to move from one point to, at that point you kind of don't do your analysis, don't take advice, don't do any homework, and you try to, what happens then? Do you know what happens then? You'll rely on hope, okay? If you do the homework, if you do try, don't take advice, no homeworks, no analysis, nothing like that, you rely on hope. And as the English say, hope is not a strategy. Or as the Swedes say, hope and trust, that's what you do in church, okay? Rest of the stuff you need to prepare, analyze, learn, and internalize information. Regarding to love, good luck with that. Tell me how that goes, okay? Thanks a lot.